Well, hello and welcome back to my old photography channel. I don't even have a good name for my photography channel. I'll just call it my photography channel. Kenny Boston here. It's been a while since I've got to make a video. I've been writing a book and it's out on Amazon now. It's called My Calling to China, a teacher's story about my first year in China. But I want to start getting some photography videos out, and I thought one of the things, I always get asked stuff on Facebook mostly about portrait photography. Everybody knows I shoot the models and, I'm a portrait photographer, yada, 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 yada. But everybody wants to know, how do you get into portrait photography? And a lot of people fall into photography for different reasons. Maybe, they took a good picture with their telephone and everybody said, oh man, you should buy a camera and become a photographer. Well, that's good. It's not always that easy. But everybody has a reason and nobody really knows what to do. One of the first things I'm going to tell you that you should do is get your butt off of Facebook. Almost everybody in Facebook has their own little opinion, which we're all entitled to, but they're also beginners. Many of them are just beginner wannabes just like you. And there are also some really good photographers there that have good advice, but sometimes it's hard to know who to listen to. Photography is not easy. If it was, everybody would do it. It's a skill. Nobody's born a natural, photographer, portrait, landscape, or whatever. You can have the vision, but you got to know how to use what you have to make that happen. So that's a big part of photography, is making your vision come across in your photographs. With portraiture photography is not, I'm going to say it's not difficult, but it is also. Because a big thing with portrait photography is you really got to know your camera and your lenses. You got to know exactly what to do to get the most out of them in every situation. So I'm going to kind of burst your bubble just for a second. If you want to start in the portraiture photography, and we're going to talk here in a minute about some cameras and lenses and things. Portrait photographers are developed. They're not natural. You cannot expect incredible results off the bat. You're going to have to take thousands and thousands of shots. You're going to have to edit thousands and thousands of photos in every situation. You got to know exactly what to do in sunlight and shade, indoors, in all situations. If it's super cloudy, what to do, all those things. You got to really understand your camera and how to get the most out of it. That's the biggest thing. You have to pay your dues. You can listen to people on Facebook. You can watch all these videos, including mine. You can watch Matt Granger and Tony and Chelsea and all these famous photographers or whatever. We can give you little insights. We can give you little steps to go towards, but you have to go out there and make it happen. And that's still a learning curve, and sometimes a really big learning curve. So absorb the information that you can, then you're going to have to go out and try to reproduce it. And that's the hard part. Now, with cameras and lenses, all right, for portraits, we're not talking about anything else right now. We're just talking about portraits. If you are beginning, that's what this video is about. You're beginning amateur or wannabe amateur portrait photographer. Just find, excuse me a second, my mouth's getting dry. Find a good, reasonable camera, and a lens that will work. All right. My suggestions, I'm a Nikon shooter, and I'm not trying to tell you to buy a Nikon or a Canon or Sony. All of them have good cameras. You need to find one that you can afford and a lens that you can afford. And I'm going to tell you what you should start out with. Me, now here's another deal too. I shoot crop sensor APS-C cameras professionally. I've never needed a full frame camera. But I suggest get a camera and get a 50 millimeter lens. If I was starting out and I had to buy one camera, one lens, whatever, I would start out with a 50 millimeter lens for portraiture. Full frame or crop sensor, 50 millimeter is a really good place to start. And get a camera, all my cameras are 24 megapixel. I've never tried to shoot any more. 24 megapixel. But find something you can afford, because you do not, and I don't care what you read on Facebook, you do not need a full frame camera for portraits. You do not need a 40 something megapixel camera, blah blah. You don't need a $3,000 camera to get started. But you do need to get good glass and get a good decent camera, and then find some editing software that you can use. And I'll be honest, I use only free software. I do not have Luminar or Lightroom or Photoshop. I use Polar, P-O-L-L, let me see how to spell it again. P-O-L-A-R-R. I use their free version. And I also use iPicky, which is an online editor that has some really, really good tools. Their blemish tool, their clone tool is outstanding. So I'll use only free editing software. So check it out. Polar is really outstanding. Anyhow, camera, lens, basics. My 50 millimeter is a 1.8. It goes down to 1.8, even though I'll tell you most of the time you do not need to shoot at 1.8. When it comes to these cameras and lenses and stuff, guys, the 50 millimeter is great because it can open up to a 1.8 aperture and let a lot of light in, but also 1.8 lets you only get about this in focus. Understand? And when you take those pictures, you want to make sure that you got a clear, sharp eye. If the eye is not in focus, it's useless. It does not look real. And you move back to about 2.8 and you got the face and most of the ears. Most of my portraits are shot at 2.8 to f4 for shooting one person. So there's a little bit of advice right there to get started. And I usually shoot about 1/60th of a second shutter speed. That's usually where I start, and I adjust from there. But you do not need the top-of-the-line camera. If you can afford to buy one, get one. Because here's the one more thing I'm going to do before we close out on this portion of the video is everything I shoot professionally, I have, let me pull this up here, dual card slots. Alright. Probably the camera that you will choose as an amateur will have only one card slot, which is fine. They almost never go bad, but I've had 3 go bad. But that's over a long time. But they can go bad. And if you move into the professional level, you really need that redundancy. You cannot afford, when you're taking money, you cannot afford to lose money. You cannot afford to have something happen to a card and go bad. You need that backup. It's money, and you can't get it back. So get a camera, get a good SD card, SanDisk or whatever. I've never had anything ever go wrong with anything made Toshiba. There's no science to it. I can just tell you anything I've ever had that said Toshiba on it, it's never went bad. So camera, lens, get started and see what you can come up with, okay? It's really simple. But I want you to have a good day, and we're going to move in. I'm going to do a series of these videos. We're going to talk about indoor, outdoor shooting. We're going to be talking about flash a little bit. Even though I have a flash video, if you look at my channel, I have a flash video. And I have a lot of stuff that will be of interest to you. Learning about ISO. I have all those videos already. But we're going to talk a little bit more detail about studio versus outdoor and some things like that, okay? But you have a great day, and I'll talk to you really, really soon. So bye-bye.